Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Trigg. Welcome to the first of our mentoring program talks, grants, where to find them, how to improve your chances of success. We're just going to wait a little bit to make sure that more people have joined. We are, so if you just sort of talk amongst yourselves, as it were, we will go to, we'll sort of started in about a minute. Great. So let's start then. Welcome and thank you for coming. Just a quick slide on the meeting etiquette for everybody for the next hour. Could you please ensure that your audio is always muted? If you wish to ask questions, we encourage that, but if you could ask them through the chat function, and Ian will answer those at the end. If you experience any technical issues, as loss of broadband or picture or link entirely, then we recommend if you just log out and log back in again, you should be able to make contact and reboot. If we lose the link, then we're going to be doing the same. So it should start again in a few minutes. So if you bear with us, home broadbands are not always as robust as we would like them to be. So I'd like to introduce and move on to Ian. So Ian Tracy was until recently, the head of access to finance and funding at Innovate UK, the main grant-giving body for early stage startups and SMEs in the UK, and was sort of key in signposting people to almost £500 million worth of investment made through the UK government into the sort of SME area. And so he has been very, very close to finding or understanding how the grants work across this sort of early stage startup field. So Ian, are you okay? I'm going to
do you want to give? Thank you, Nick. That's very kind of you. Would you be kind enough to give me the screen?
I have stopped sharing.
Yep. I'll just start up. There we go. Right, thank you, everybody. So, the first thing we're going to get across is this is a journey you're going to be going on. And like many journeys, it's going to have good days and bad days. And I'm going to urge you to build a support network to help you through that journey, to listen to you on your good and, more importantly, your bad days. And you want that journey to include fellow entrepreneurs who've got the scars, and dare I say it, somebody other than your loved one who will eventually get fed up of hearing of the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur. And I find having a circle, virtual or otherwise, of people you can have a metaphorical drink and a whinge is a great way of taking yourself forward. Do not underestimate that. A big thing in this, and this is the same for going for grants as it is for investment, as it is for talking to your customers, is embrace robust criticism and feedback. The normal way that we have of offering feedback tends to be we emphasize the positives, and in a very terribly English, and I am very mindful of the fact that we've got an international audience today, but in a very terrible English way, we don't talk about the negatives and allow people to second guess the negatives by the gaps in the feedback. That's a painful way to learn. And I always tell people, look at the flaw of your product, of your, so if you're talking about the grants, which questions did you do the weakest on, and bring them up is a lot easier than worrying about the good answers. And to do that, you need to have people who you can trust to give you the straight talk. But do avoid those who are unduly negative, because they'll bring you down. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to go through the different options for funding. I do have a UK-centric outlook, but I think the lessons can show widely, and the broad brush techniques are going to be the same, especially across Europe. Innovation agencies share best practice and build their tool set with each other's help. There are 4 main ways of funding your company. It's simple as grants, where somebody else gives you some money, debt, where somebody else lends you the money, sales, where you've persuaded somebody else to buy it, and finally, investment, where you've sold part of your company. Fundamentally, these are the only 4 ways that you've got of bringing money into your company, organisation or project. Do not underestimate the importance of sales. This is the revenue stream, the income stream that you have the most control over. And fundamentally, whatever your company's doing, no matter who you're talking to, be it an investor, a grant giver or a bank, the journey they want to know about is that at some point the real world is going to buy something and generate wealth. And so from the beginning, talk to customers and try them, sell them things, not just because it gives you cash that you need, but it makes your product set real and provides the evidence that the other people need, like the banks, the grant givers and the investors, that you're not going off on a tangent and that this is a journey they want you to go along. And don't forget, as it says on the bottom, sales is one of the best form of traction to significantly increase your valuation when it comes to fundraising. And when it comes to fundraising, all of us want to get a good, fair price. Let's look a bit about the innovation landscape. These are real numbers from the UK, but in the UK, in 2018, about just under £2 billion was put in by angels, according to the tax records, compared to just over 400 million from VCs. So this really tells us that the early stage investors, the business angels, up to $500,000 or maybe $1 million, are the biggest source of money. Take on board that the VCs tend to be doing bigger rounds, i.e. larger investments, then the total number of investments made is massive in that early stage. And I would argue that if you've got a great product with a good market and you can tell a compelling story, you should get funded. If you're not getting funded, you're failing on one of those key pillars, and you need to ask yourself the tough questions. VC funding, there's a valley of death. The number of deals is an order of magnitude less. There it gets harder, and for VC funding, I will say the missing key statement a lot of the time, but not all the time, if you're doing the first 3 pillars that you use for your angel round, is the quality of your management team and your non-execs. That comes much more prominent for the VCs. Innovate UK, £500 million. So it's about as much as VCs. Again, very early stage. And also, look, 65% of angels, 85% of VCs sit in the golden triangle. Now, it's horrible. If you live in Manchester or Glasgow or Cardiff, it's horrible that that money isn't on your doorstep. However, if you had a customer who wanted to give you a purchase order for £150,000 and asked you to spend a day at their premises, how far would you travel to have that conversation? I think we have to touch upon the recent change that has happened. And April 2019, the government borrowed nearly 11 billion. April this year, it jumped to 62 billion. Tax is down 42%, spending has increased 52%. Many of you will feel that this is a doom and gloom situation. I actually see this as a picture of optimism and good news. It is quite clear to anybody that the government, and this is across the globe, have an economy to kickstart, and we cannot do it by reducing interest rates. We cannot realistically cut the tax much because we're going to need every penny we can get our hands on, and so I see innovation spending likely to see significant improvements. And what I mean by that, there's going to be more soft loans coming out from the banks, and there's going to be more grants coming out. So if you look at these tools, you might see in the next 3 months a lot more money on the table. So what are the advantages of grants? They'll take high risk. They add an awful lot of credibility to you. If you're going for investment, the investors will see grants won through a competitive process to be a sign that you're different from the crowd. How competitive is that process? Some of the Innovate UK grants have a 5% success rate, and we'll touch upon that later. Disadvantages, the match. Really difficult to get the match for early stage companies. You have very few resources. But the bigger disadvantage for me are companies who are twisting their business plan, twisting the emphasis of the company by grant chasing. Grants should be taking you in a direction you want to go. You should not be taking your company in the direction of the grants. I'm a firm believer in that, and I know if you've got zero in the bank, that's a tough message to believe. But trust me, that's the way it should be happening. What type of grants are there? Well, it's everywhere from regional all the way through to European, as you would expect. Regional grants. The big thing to take out of the regional grants is the devolved governments, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, have significantly more investment capability than the national. So the UK government we talked about did £500 million. In the same year, the Scottish government, for those of you who don't know, memory says it's a population of 8 million rather than 60 million, spent over 200 million on that population. Northern Ireland, by far the biggest amount of people biggest amount of investment per head of population. You can think of the recent history in the 70s and 80s as a key contributor to that. And if you want to build a manufacturing plant, I would be looking at the devolved assemblies as areas to be building your manufacturing if it's convenient. Europe, there is of course a big question over how that's going to pan out for the UK. And I would suggest we probably need to wait slightly to understand the landscape, but that looks like it's less than 12 months away. The biggie on the sector grants for me is SBRIs, Small Business Research Initiative. These are purchase orders, 100% funded and not a grant to do innovation through the government. High level challenges, look out for them, they're really good. And if you can slot in underneath an SBRI, and it can be up to £1 million per project in certain circumstances, that is a fantastic way of growing your organisation. There are, of course, a few European grants. I'm just going to jump through these because you're going to get my slides afterwards and you can read them in detail at your leisure. So, when it comes to finding grants, be creative and see how you can fit yourself into the criteria. So let me give you a real example. I know a company that wants to make high power lasers. The stopping point was that they needed a power supply. So they understood the characteristics of the power supply they wanted to build, and then they joined a consortium that wasn't building a laser that needed that type of power supply. So they designed the power supply for this consortium somewhere else, and then they just had to modify the design when it was finished to have their type of high power supply. Debt, banks. The advantage is you don't sell any part of your organisation. Can be flexible, very form-centric, but the big difficulty is twofold. The days of the waistcoated bank manager making a decision because he knows you're a good sort of egg have long gone. This is computerized central decision making with minimal customer service at the edges, And the big pain is that when the going gets tough, the banks tend to be the people who pull the safety drawbridge up for themselves, unlike investors and grant givers. And in these difficult times, that's going to be a challenge, hence the big range of products that have just come out to help. I would push you towards the startup loans. Fantastic product. I'm going to touch upon innovation loans next. Startup loans, £25,000 per director to a maximum of 4 to help you create a plan and get yourself going. Two fantastic platforms are the Business Finance Guide and the Peer-to-Peer Lending Guide. They're the details. 6% per year for a startup loan, 1 to 5 years to pay it back. So it's a really good form of funding to get you going. Innovation loans. This is basically to take late-stage innovation projects to market. The development of the innovation product will be done using the grants earlier on, but making the production line, for example, to manufacture the widget is unlikely to be bank financed because you have no sales record with that product. And so an innovation loan gives you 3 years to develop the product and take it to market, 2 years to sell the product, and then you have 5 years to repay the loan. The interest rates change. Last time round, they were at about 3.2% APR, so a very affordable form of loan. Expect significant increases to this going forward, given the need to stimulate the economy. Crowdfunding. Basically asking a bunch of people to buy into your vision. And you can do it from everything from borrowing with debt, selling bits of your company, selling them a product, and giving them a donation. This can be a really good use of evidence for traction, for investment. And I know one company that I supported back when Nick was a colleague of mine at STFC, did a Kickstarter to pre-sell a product and then use the evidence of a Kickstarter as basically a glorified market research report to go to the VCs to secure the first funding round. Because fundamentally they went to the VC and said, look, 1,000 people have paid 50 quid for this product. That is better market research than asking somebody, will they buy the product when they have bought the product? The big problem with crowdfunding is the failure rate. The failure rate is surprisingly high, and the crowds are behaving more and more like crowds of lemmings, meaning that you need to get many people across the line before the rest of them follow. And you do get some crowd platforms asking you to have half of the crowd warm. So if you're looking to raise 200,000, they want you to have people ready to commit £100,000 the day it goes on to create that inertia for the rest of the members to follow. Another big problem with the crowd is the complexity of your cap table, your share ownership, if you go the equity route. And so then I would say look out for a nominee account. Otherwise, the number of names on your cap table will slow you down later. And I personally believe that some of the valuations on the crowd are too high when it comes to equity, and that is acting as a hindrance to further funding rounds. I believe we've covered all that. I mean, the biggies I'd take out of this, the number of platforms, far too many. Gets very difficult to see where you're meant to be. Investment. The great thing about investment is it should be more than the money. And I believe Don's going to be touching upon this later on in the series. And what you want to be covering there is the fact that you've got credible people who can make introductions. You have to come to grips with the fact that you're selling part of your company. It will not just be your baby anymore. And that comes with a bit of emotional baggage that not everybody can accept. So this is the investment landscape. And it gives you a feeling of the amount of money. So friends and family up to 100,000. The angels will be around 100,000, million, maybe a bit more through syndication. You start touching the VCs at 2 to 3 million, and then the numbers go up. And at some point you're going to sell out, be it via a trade sale or an IPO. So what differentiates investors? Typical deal size for an angel, as I said, is about 1 to $500,000. Now, about 8 of the 10 deals are done through syndication, which means you've got to get people working together, and they expect to be in the company for about 5 to 8 years. They're very driven by intellectual property and what's unique about yours, and what does the early revenue looks like. Tax is a big driver. So in the UK, if you're an early stage investor, you get a chunk of your investment back off your tax bill. This will not make an uninvestable company investable, but not having that tax break on your investment means you're likely to be ignored for a similar investable idea with that tax break. So do check to see if you're eligible for SEIS or EIS. And there's fantastic information about that on the website. Google is your friend. VCs. Big difference between angels and VCs for me is the amount of due diligence that VCs do. Tend to be a lot more formal in it, tend to think more spreadsheets and reports and documents, and tend to require more control. So a VC is reinvesting other people's cash to give them a better rate of return, and they have to return that cash back to the cash owner, the insurance company typically, in 10 years' time. So they have this process that they'll invest for the first 3 years, grow a company for 3 to 5 years, and then exit in the last 2 to 3 years. So a really good question to ask a VC, when did the fund open? If that fund opened more than 2 years ago, it's unlikely that they will be making investments. If that fund is more than 5 years old, I'll be amazed if they're making investments. We've covered off that. Corporate venturing. I think this is the unsung hero in the landscape. This is where you have large organisations investing money into companies. Some of them are going to be like GE and they have the attitude of a VC. It's all about cash flow management. Some of them are going to be typically a bit smaller, are doing it to supply innovation for themselves or to help build a marketplace. And I would urge you to explore the corporate venturing. Try and understand how the corporate's behaving, and are they more like an angel growing a marketplace, or are they more like a VC managing cash flow is a key to it. And the British Venture Capital Association is a great resource. All comes down to a cocktail of funding. So you could get your grant that requires a 30% match, use that as traction evidence to go to VCs to encourage them to come in because of the evidence it gives you. So see how these things dovetail together. Do not forget your tax breaks. Your R&D tax breaks are also a very useful source of funding. I'm now going to dive into the grants. Now, the grants are essentially 10 questions that get scored and answered by a bunch of individuals. These individuals get paid £125 per exam paper to answer the work. I want you to ask yourself, how much work would you do for £125? And some of you are going to say, Ian, for £125 where my revenue is as a startup, quite a lot of time. And in that case, I'll say, how much work would your Ford dealership garage do for £125? Most examiners will spend about 2 hours going through your grant application. So you have to structure your grant application so it's easy for them to tick it and put the red ticks down and score the points. They are not going to be wowed over by fancy English. So project summary. This is unmarked but surprisingly important. Many people do badly on the project summary because it says this is unmarked. What happens is a grant assessor gets given 10 companies and gets asked which do they feel competent to assess. They get given the project summaries. If you see one that looks complicated and you think this is going to take me much more than 3 hours to go through, you say, I don't feel competent to assess. And so you end up getting passed to the second and third choice. If you see a project summary that is got a nice tempo, it's easy to follow, and you're excited about it, you volunteer to assess it, and the people have a positive frame of mind. You do not want to be assessed by the third choice. Public description, only published if you're successful. See it as a piece of marketing. Think what you want to put in and what you want to leave out. I know there are investors who go through the public descriptions to decide which companies they should be engaging with to check out for investment. So it's actually really quite useful for that. Scope. So the scope question, first question that gets marked, and the purpose of the scope is to decide if we should bother spending 5 lots of 125 quid on you. We use this to get rid of applications. And it is pedantic. So when I was at STFC, there was a competition that was for the Harwell Space Cluster. And it was designed to grow and build the Harwell Space Cluster. The scope question was, are you located on the Harwell campus? Harwell's just outside Oxfordshire. And people were writing, we're located in the ESA Business Incubator. They were being rejected for being out of scope because the person who was doing the work, who might be in Liverpool or Glasgow or Aberdeen, did not know where the ESA Business Incubator was. And they were told projects have to be inside the Harwell campus. So if the scope question says Harwell campus, they should have just said, we're in the ESA Business Incubator, comma, Harwell campus, full stop. And then the scope would have been in. By the time you have been de-scoped, the money has been allocated and the right of appeal is meaningless. Need or challenge. What is the need that we're trying to fix? Is it a technical challenge? Is it a market opportunity? Market pull is far better than technology push. Most of the time, people will be saying, we've got a widget trying to find a market. It's far better to say, we've got a market with the solution. Now, the way you answer all the questions is if you click on the guidance sheet, it will say, describe or explain. And it gives you those, in this question 1, these are the 5 bullet points. When you come to answer it, you carry forward those bullet points. And so I've underlined the words that I've carried forward from the guidance. And it's as easy as our main motivation for this project. We explored and discovered the unmet business need, the technical challenge we're doing, the market opportunity is worth. So when the person sits there on a Sunday afternoon with a glass of wine and a metaphorical red pen, they can see that and go, oh, they've talked about motivation, they've talked about business needs, they've talked about the challenge, they've talked about the opportunity. That feels like an 8, not a 5. And you have to imagine that the scoring is from 0 to 10 and people basically pick the odd numbers and try and decide which one you roughly are. It is not a science, folks. It is a gut reaction as they read your words 9 times out of 10. This is the crib sheet that the examiners get, the assessors. Please look at the amount of extra text to get a 9 and a 10 relative to a 7 or an 8. It is really hard to get 9s. Many assessors will not give a 10 out of principle because they do not believe in perfection, is what I hear. And the default score tends to be a 6. So actually, when people turn around and say, we just missed it, we got 72%, because the quality threshold is technically 70, no, you're just about average. You're the good average rather than the average average. You need to be seeing 8 and 9s to be in the winning pack. So what's the approach in innovation? What challenge are you going to solve? How are you better than your competitors? And how it builds on earlier work and your freedom to operate. Team. Make sure you stress that you have an A-class team. We want to see credentials, we want to see that it's going to happen, and you've got to tell us where the missing gaps. I'm also going to sort of point out that the assessors are told to trust everything on the form unless they don't trust you anymore, then only then start sanity checking and validating what you say. They will not follow Google links. They will not check that that the quote you've quoted off somebody really exists until they don't believe you. So don't waste your character counts throwing in URLs to websites to prove something if what you're saying feels fairly believable. What do you know about the market? This is where we want to see numbers and references and talk about the addressable market. There's one word I hate on this slide, and that's the word conservative. It should be sensible, argued numbers. Don't justify it by saying 1% of the market share is this, a conservative estimate. That's a disaster. Instead, define a market share where you can say, we expect to get 20% of this market share, and this is why. How are you going to take it to market? And this is where the value proposition is going to come through. And that's going to talk about the benefit and what it's worth to your customers. And you're going to talk about the route to those customers and how you're going to engage with them. Most technology fails because they don't engage with the marketplace, not because the technology fails once they've got to the marketplace. This is a vital question. This is the soft stuff, and I find it really hard to do. And that is, how do you look for how you change society as a whole? And it needs a little bit of hard work. But once you do it, you do start seeing some big numbers. So I was working with a project that was to do with the television industry. And you suddenly discover that the impact of the television industry on the economy is several billion pounds. And that's the beauty of working with these softer numbers, only wider impacts. Project management needs to be appropriate. So if you're doing a £100,000 project, I do not expect to see a Prince 2 qualified project manager running it. That will be weekly phone calls and a Gantt chart. If you're part of a £2 million consortium in the aerospace sector, I would not be surprised if there was a Prince 2 project manager, program manager running it. It's appropriate for the money, it's appropriate for the sector. If you end up doing, I think they're Feynman diagrams, then you really have misunderstood your project management skills. Risks. Horrible question, because you need to tell us the risks without it making us completely scared that it's too risky. I would suggest that Google is your friend. Quite a few people have put examples of their risk registers on Google along with the feedback that they've got from Innovate UK when they were submitted, and you stand on the shoulders of others. Added value. This is where you have to try and tell us that the project wouldn't otherwise succeed without your help, but with your help, it'll be amazing. You can talk of things like private investors will come along because of this grant. It's going to open up new markets to us, credibility and all those sort of stuff. Another question I struggle to answer. Costs and value for money. Fundamentally, we want to make sure that this is a good project and isn't being overcosted. Subcontractors are difficult. Subcontractors come out at 100%, whereas grant contributions come in at 2/3. So we want to know why we're using subcontractors. The work should be undertaken in the UK unless there's compelling reason not to. So use a subcontractor for skills you don't want to build in-house. For skills that you can build in-house, we would tell you to build them in-house. The small print will kill you. And what I'll tell you to do is email the helpline, because their answers are binding. You can go and Google Innovate UK, they have a nice little helpline. It takes them a week to respond. So don't start emailing sanity questions in the last 48 hours. But if you want to check any details, email's the way to go. You can phone the lead technologist. You just need to do a little bit of Google work and see who the lead technologist is and fire them off an email and say, we want clarity on this, and they normally get back to you. Or if it's on a technical sector, look up the folk at the Knowledge Transfer Network and figure out who's the sector lead at the KTN, and they'll have a bit of inside knowledge on what the grant's aiming to achieve, because they might have been part of the process in scoping it out. Let's talk about the assessors. 5 of them are going to assess you. You will find that 1 will love it, 1 will hate it, and 3 will give it an average 7. When I see that, when I see a broad spectrum of answers coming through, it tells me that people are struggling with your English, as simple as that. And the one who's giving you a high score is probably reading it more diligently than the others. And so when you see a broad spectrum, think about simplifying your English and make it more engaging. These are the top tips on one page. I'd like to bring out, it takes a long time to get partner agreements together sometimes, and it can be really quite difficult making sure that your answers dovetail. The number of times that you read something and you can tell that each question's been done by a different person, and it actually makes reading it much, much harder, because you have these different styles of English and it's jumping, and it literally jars with you as when you're reading it. And so if you are doing a multi-person written document, have a lead author and get everybody else to feed in draft, and the lead author rewrites it in their English. The other thing I would urge you to do is to save one person close to the project who knows the project in sufficient detail but hasn't written it, so they can read it through and highlight the missing points. On the deadlines, the Innovate UK computer shuts down at noon on competition day. It is noon, not noon 0.01. It is noon on the computer clock at Swindon, not on your watch, not even at Greenwich, where the timekeeping is done. If you are late, you are late. The spike is absolutely huge at 10 to noon. You can't imagine it. So I tell people, you're aiming for noon the day before. Just tell, you've got 3 weeks to write it, you're doing it in 2 weeks and 5 and 6 days, and you're doing noon the day before, or at the very worst, 11 a.m. on the day. After 11 a.m, you're starting to make life hard for yourself. There is something known as undertakings in difficulty, and this is a rule that kicks in if your company is more than 3 years old. Many startups start off with directors' loans for things like travel expenses and for untaken wages. And these can ratchet up quite quickly to more than share capital, because many companies have a £100 share cap in the UK. So if you have a director's loan of more than £50 and your company is more than 3 years old, you could be in a situation where your company is technically an undertaking in difficulty and thus ineligible for Innovate and other forms of UK government support. I am not an accountant. I cannot offer advice. I can urge you to go to an accountant and ask what would happen if you took your director's loans and converted them into a non-voting class of share that is redeemable by board approval. You might find it would help you get through the undertaking in difficulty clause, but it requires your accountant to come to that conclusion. This is a really good application guide from the Knowledge Transfer Network. You can point your camera towards the 2D barcode and take a picture to download it. It goes into more detail over the stuff that I've been talking about, and you can see the URL. You can collect that off the slides when they get emailed around later. Try and make sure you're different from the crowd. Too many people sound similar to other ideas that we've heard previously, and we want to get a certain level of excitement and panache coming through on your project. Put some effort in that and it will stand you in good stead. Please avoid buzzword bingo like blockchain. The number of blockchain ideas that are flowing around at the moment, and quantum, and you see people who then do quantum blockchain thinking that we've had an innovation, and trust me, on the other side you just go blah, 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 blah. Please do not be blah, blah, blah. That was a canter through the slides. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions, and please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Point your camera at the screen. Nick.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. You can leave that slide on for now, for sure. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. I have got a couple of myself. If anybody else has got any other questions, one or two are coming through on the chat, but please, now's your chance. Put it on the chat and I'll ask Ian later on. How would you describe, Ian, this being different from, out of interest, a VC pitch? This is the way you described it, it is different from a VC pitch. Would you summarize the differences between the two? Because I think everyone sort of thinks it probably ought to be something similar to a VC pitch, and it isn't.
It isn't, but I think a lot of the questions are similar. I think the thing you're bringing across is this is more about how you're going to grow the economy and your part in it. For example, a VC pitch is going to be more interested on how you capture wealth purely for yourself. I think a VC pitch is going to be more interested on the management team than we are. We're going to get a bit more interested in the tech and why is it different from other tech. So I'd say in the Venn diagram there's an overlap, and it's a considerable overlap, but you need to cover off what makes you riskier than a normal investment opportunity.
Okay. Sorry, I'd also like to bring somebody else into the Q&A session. Don McClaverty is on the line, and he's the mentor who's going to be giving you the Better Business Plans talk in a couple of weeks or so. Thanks for coming, Don, and welcome. I thought that the three of us actually could answer some of these questions, or at least you two could answer some of the questions. So, Don, would you add anything to what Ian said on that?
So thanks, and hello everyone. I would just like to echo what Alex Money has put into the chat box. I thought that was an outstanding presentation, Ian, and it's not just because I know you. I thought it really well. and I thought you addressed a lot of things really brilliantly, much better than I would do. But let's not go there. But the key things that I'd say, I think what I found really you captured really well was putting up how the assessors are scoring, because I think that's really a key thing that many people wouldn't understand. I've never been an assessor, but I know two, and so when I ask them the question, why do you reject people if they reject so many, and the straightforward answer comes back, they don't answer the question. Yeah, and which is what you've addressed all the way through. It's just crudely, they don't answer the question. We've asked them a question, they haven't answered it. They filled it up, the 250 words or whatever, with stuff that's useful and interesting, but they haven't answered the question I need to score to give them the mark. Yeah.
Yep. And the other thing they do is you give them 5 bullet points, say, and they'll answer the first 3, realise they're out of words, and not answer the second 2 bullets.
Correct. I've heard that complaint also. Another thing that I'd say, in just again supporting what you're saying there, but taking a slightly different spin on it, at £125 a paper, the people are looking at I only know 2, and they're both retired. So they're doing it because they're interested in the space, and they probably know a lot about the space to take on the job, or they've learned a lot. So whilst they're not going to go on Google and do a lot of work, I have heard and he picks up on your blockchain point or quantum point. Oh, I've just read one and it's got blockchain. They don't know how to spell blockchain. What are they talking about? They've not explained how it fits into their application in any shape or form. And they've just thrown it in because they think it's exciting and that will get them money. And I don't know if you'd agree with that, Ian, but that's what they say.
So what we say there is we see people trying to sprinkle some fairy dust. So they'll see there's been an announcement that 10 million's gone into a new quantum technology centre. And then you'll see a wave of applications coming in saying, we're quantum tech. And you think, it's not as easy as that.
No. So that's what I say. I mean, I thought and taking it really seriously and getting a good, you said it in a different format before, but getting friends around you who can help them. Someone asked me last year, would I help them write an application? I said, I could do, and you could pay me for it. I know someone far better than me who knows this area. So I'll introduce you to him, and they got their money. They tried before using somebody else. It's just choosing, does this again make sense, Ian?
So for me, I've been on a journey with grant writers. So when I first joined, on the government side, I was furious about grant writers. I used to, this is 10 years ago, and I used to say, how can a government build a bureaucratic system so ineptly that I have to pay an advisor to answer some questions when I have no money? And that's exactly how I felt. But I've learned and I've changed, and I now see it a different way. And I say, if you're a tech-centric company who sees grants as the backbone of your innovation journey, perhaps you're biotech where you're going to have a decade of it, then you have to bring those skills in-house. If you're doing a one-off grant because it's you're established and it's one piece of innovation, I'd say get yourself a grant writer. And the way I express it is, when I bought my house, I paid a solicitor. They took 2% of the house price and they did all the conveyancing because I didn't want to become an expert. I'm sure that the Council Home Association has in-house lawyers that do all the conveyancing because it's core business. And you just have to decide what it is. If grants are core business for you, get the skills in-house. If it's not, get a grant writer who's learning those scars all the time.
Okay, in a couple of other questions before we go to the floor, as it were. On the value for money the question.
Yeah.
You know, so how is it assessed? Just a little bit more on that. I mean, my feeling, you know, which is a question rather than a statement, is that it's quite a difficult thing for somebody reading it in a couple of hours to really get under the skin of.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know as a reader, as an assessor, whether 40 or 50 grand is good value for money, or say 100 grand. So, you know, in other words, the value is a sort of, is not, selling myself cheap doesn't necessarily get myself more marks, is what I'm trying to say.
I think there's several
Right?
elements. Yeah, there's several elements. I think the first one is nobody fails because they go, it was a good project, and if it was 5% cheaper, they would have had it. They might fail if they go, it's a good project, but it's twice as expensive as it should be. And, you know, it's that sort of nuancing. And then when it comes to the individual details, value for money isn't just your costs, and we have a feeling for what those costs should be, we know what day rates are, but it's also the other work that you bring in. So if you're sort of saying, we're working with this big engineering blue chip and they're helping this with that, that increases the value of the value for money because you're facilitating other bits of work. Whereas if the whole project is just on your company and you're only spending it internally, then it's harder, you've got more of a job to demonstrate your good value for money. Does that make sense? Because of softer third-party benefits that you're pulling in. I think we should also mention that there's been a change in the way that Innovate UK allocate their funding in the last 2 years. If we were having this conversation 2 years ago, what happened was they scored everybody and then they went from the best giving out money until they ran out of money. Now they score everybody. They have a minimum quality threshold of 70%, and then they use portfolio analysis to allocate the money across that portfolio. So if it's your first time and people go, this is a great project, they scored 72%, and you know what, the value for money, they've really fumbled it, but it's a great project. You will get a different view than somebody who, I know of one company that has done 15 applications successfully and failed to commercialise any. And now they're going to that one, they're going, well, they've had 15 attempts to commercialise previous bright ideas and they've failed. What confidence do we have that they'll commercialise the 16th? And they can be scoring 85, 90%, but they're failing on the portfolio analysis.
Okay, another question before we go to the ones on the floor, so please keep them coming. And again, in a sense, the same sort of point about market size. A preference, or do you get more marks if you are addressing you know, £100 million market or a £10 million market? Is that a points thing or not?
Simplistically, yes, but it's also relative to the amount of money that's coming into the project. You know, if you're just doing a £50,000 feasibility, you're going to have a different threshold than, say, a £2 million joint project. I think it's also accepted that early stage, so, you know, the early days of quantum, the market sizing was just I'm going to say a joke in every meaning of the word. But we knew it could be big. And then these projects, as they become more and more real, you find the numbers become smaller but more concrete, because you begin to find where quantum actually is useful rather, I mean, at the moment, Internet of Things, it's anything and nothing, isn't it? You know, there's all sorts. You can look on the Gartner height curve to know where you sit, and that'll tell you what's changing. So the more real it gets,
another way of answering the question, I guess, is asking the question, is if you and I were sort of competing for the same grant and we wrote basically the same text, i.e. we answered all the questions, but your market size was, 100 million and mine was 10. Would you get more marks, or should, in the normal sort of course of events, would you get more marks than me or
I don't think I think if they're both credible numbers, not enough to make a difference.
Okay.
And what they'll be done.
Oh, sorry, and I was just going to sound you out, really. I mean, my belief is that failing to have a stab is not a good thing.
Yes.
That's based on some sort of premise. However, as you say, in some situations you could drive a bulldozer through it, but at least you think that I defer to your knowledge on this because I'm not the expert on the grants, but on the grant assessment. But my belief is that having a stab at it, having a go at it, and actually showing your logic and your thinking is really important. And it's not so much the absolute figure.
You're completely correct, and it also depends on the size of the organisation as well. So if you're a 3-person software startup and you're saying this might bring 10 million a year turnover to us, we are going, well, hang on, that's a game changer. If you're Rolls-Royce, I keep on mentioning you, but you're just the big company that's in my head today, and Rolls-Royce was submitting a grant application, one of the biggest grant recipients, by the way, Rolls-Royce, and you said this might add 10 million onto our turnover, you'd be looking around going, why are you even dreaming of doing a grant? Why have you woken up this morning? I think that's what I was trying to get across as well. It's a multifaceted answer, Nick, and it all comes together, but you're not going to lose it on one point in that part of the grant.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So questions from the floor then. Can you explain a bit more about the project management aspect, Gantt chart, etc.? Do you mean that there should be a really detailed plan or roadmap?
As detailed as the money justifies. Like I said, if it's a £2 million project, I want to see work packages, I want to see a Gantt chart, I want to hear of your methodology over how you're going to manage it. There might be stakeholder boards. If it's a 50,000 piece, I'll be happy with weekly progress phone calls and here's a Gantt chart.
Okay. So does Innovate UK have a grant source suited to infrastructure projects? From Simon Eberts.
At the risk of misunderstanding question, I'm thinking, well, it depends what you mean by infrastructure. My natural tendency would be to go to the devolved governments because they have more funding options in that area. Innovate UK is targeted at innovation. So if you're talking about the innovation in an infrastructure project, yes. If you're talking about building the infrastructure that contains innovation, you normally find the devolved governments or the LEPs have a bigger part to play because they want to bring that infrastructure to the physical, geological turf.
Okay. Thanks. From Alex Money, are there recommended routes to finding an appropriate grant writer? There are companies offering the services that too generic an approach. It's hard to find evidence of grant writers' work, understandably.
Yeah. It's a bit like buying salespeople. They're the hardest people to recruit, aren't they? Because if anybody can sell you a good story, it's a salesperson. So when I say how to find a grant finder, ask companies that you work with who they rate. In the absence that you can't find somebody, we talked right at the beginning about having somebody to go with you on the journey. In the absence of that, ask them questions. So look for how much of their fee is success versus a day rate. I'm very worried if it's all success, only because, and this is very broad brush and often wrong, but sometimes it's an indicator that they don't actually have much traction, so they're staking more on it to get a few early wins. I'm always worried if there's no success fee because they've de-risked it too much. So I expect it to be joint between a bit of success and a bit of a day rate, and ask to speak to people that have helped and take out references on them. There is absolutely nothing wrong saying, who are your 3 best projects that you've helped? I would like introductions to the CEOs, please. And you can tell a lot by the way people answer questions, can't you? If that sort of question, they're going, yeah, I know these 3 people, I'll happily introduce you, off you go. It's completely different than somebody who ums and ahs their way past that point.
Okay. Don, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not to that last question for sure, because I agree with what you're saying there, Ian. I mean, some people have been around. I think there's a sort of longevity as well. Some people have you just know them. They've been around, and they and you can see that they've had a success.
Yeah,
that's what I say.
But there's no trade association you can go to.
Not that I'm aware of. That might be a market opportunity.
Okay, so what
organisation for grant writers who can make some money there.
Can you give us sort of just a couple of minutes on sort of what happens after the grant is won? What's the what are the sort of pitfalls? How does it managed, and what are the sort of issues that you need to worry about? I mean, one is the obvious, is actually cash flow, well, match funding and cash flow, but why don't you summarize?
So all sorts of things pop in then. First of all, you'll get your offer letter, and the offer letter will ask you a bunch of questions like, are you an undertaking in distress, and how are you going to manage your match? Your match is difficult to prove. And, if you've made a case that I'm going to match using investment, you might need to delay your start while you go out seeking investors. You'll have a time limit on things because the way Innovate UK manages the process, they have to deliver a cash profile to Treasury. The things that I find trip companies up is the amount of time it takes to get match. But I'd also say, speak to Innovate UK. They become really quite human after you've got the grant offer letter. Before the grant offer letter, the numbers are really big and you're managing a huge pipeline. Post-grant offer letter, the numbers are small enough that the human elements come to the front. And they're a lot more human. I'm sure there's many Innovate UK callers who may feel insulted by that statement, and I didn't mean it in an insulting manner, but hopefully you know what I mean.
Okay. Another question from the floor from Simon. If someone wants to build something large, i.e. moonshot idea, but wants to start small and iteratively, then how should we pitch it? Should the vision or exec summary in a small grant application be large or bold, or focused only on the specific grant we're applying for?
That's a good question. If it was me, I go back to that laser company. When they were applying for the project on the power supply, they built themselves a consortium where the power supply was the thing and you didn't need to worry about the laser. And that power supply in that consortium was a very grounded step. Overall, it added to a longer journey for a big laser, but the step of the power supply in the short term was completely grounded. It's very difficult getting support for moonshots, and I have heard plenty of criticism for Innovate UK about its inability to back moonshots. And it's an easy criticism to place, because how on earth do you place bets on moonshots? I am not optimistic. I'm curious more than optimistic, to see if Cummins comes out with his plan to have a DARPA-type agency for moonshots. I can see there's a gap in the marketplace, but how do you fund it? And how much, if you rocked up and said, we're happy to take moonshot ideas, wow, that's got lots of spend written against it, hasn't it? I'm also really impressed. Good people to look at are the nuclear fusion folks who were at Culham. King, isn't it? I can't.
David Kingham. I used to report to him. Yes.
Now, Tokamak Solutions. Thank you. I just couldn't pull. Now, David Kingham, Don's old boss. Wow, are building a nuclear fusion reactor that has got moonshot written all over it. They're also on their third VC funding round, and I think they got 10 million last time round from memory.
My memory says they probably raised about 80 million or 60 million or something.
I might be behind the... Yeah, but it just shows you it's... And when I listened to David tell his story, it was an entrepreneur's dinner above a pub. And everybody else had gone on stage before him going, we're trying to raise 2 million to build a prototype to recycle carpet tiles and we can't get it. The market is broken. And David stood up and said, we've just closed, it was a couple of years ago, 20 million, now 80. Building a nuclear fusion power. And he explained that the first time he went fundraising, his business plan was, we've got the best way of destroying hospital waste. It wasn't that it was nuclear fusion and it was energy positive. It was hot enough to destroy hospital waste, and the energy loss was in. It's selling a story that fixes real problems on the journey, is what I'm trying to say.
Could I just add to that without giving any of David's secret away? Because I don't know any, actually. I haven't seen him for a long time. But I remember when he raised the first 10 million, and I said, David, that's amazing. You've raised 10 million quid towards green energy from nuclear fusion. How'd you do that? And he said, well, that's all about aligning, and this is what you said before, Ian, aligning there's a problem out there. What's my solution going to be to help the people, that problem, and who would be interested in being to support this? Is this the sort of thing that Innovate UK does? Is this the sort of thing that a large VC would do? Is this something that a VC who's a hedge fund manager who's an astrophysicist might want to back because he's curious? And he went and he really thought about who was going to invest in this. So I'm not trying to take it away from the grants. I'm sure they've had lots of
No, it's the same story.
It's around knowing what you've got, knowing what problems it fixes, knowing who'd want that problem fixed, and just going down that path.
And it's also, and this is beyond grants, this is investment banks, everybody.
Yeah.
It's having an A-class team.
Yeah.
Because if you can persuade experts in the field who carry real gravitas, and I mean real gravitas, where people go, I've heard of them, that you can fix this problem, other people buy into the story when you can use their names. I mean, another company I was working with wanted to make a new type of jet plane. Think about it for a second. Who wakes up in the morning and goes, we're going to build a new type of jet plane to compete with Airbus? Yeah, and they got this A-class team and they're being funded through their journey because people just look at their board and go, well, if those folks are on board, this is working.
Okay. I think last question, and then we'll go to just a couple more slides from me. Just another repeat, really, of what the statistic you stated on winning a grant. So I mean, the odds are against us, aren't they? They
have to be against you, and the reason. So let's stick with simple headlines. If you take SMART, which used to be known as Open, that is a general purpose grant bucket. It was originally designed for. So if you're running an innovation agency, you have a strategy. Part of that strategy has to include ideas you don't know of yet, because you're an innovation agency. You can't roadmap innovation in 5 years' time. And so the SMART/Open call was meant to be that bucket for ideas we don't know of yet. That has a 5% success rate, and it's dropping. If you look at the last one, because of COVID, lots of people were sat at home and they had the capability to think, and so there was a flood of applications. However, I would argue that if you look at that 5% success rate, a third of them are out of scope. A third of them are badly written, surprisingly badly written. So suddenly a 5% becomes possibly a 15-20% of credible ones. Innovate UK used to say they're aiming for about a 1 in 3 success rate. If they get 1 in 3 as their success rate, they know that the race is narrow enough for sensible answers and the great projects have been funded. If you start going beyond 1 in 2, there's a risk that you've not got a good enough pipeline of ideas.
Okay, that's great. Would you mind
unsharing?
Unsharing, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's over there. Stop share. Oh, yours, Nick.
Yeah, okay. Right, just a couple of bits of paperwork, so can you see that? Ian, can everybody see that?
Yes, I can see it, Nick, yes.
Great, excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, Ian. I thought that was really good. Just to remind everybody on the call that all of the UK entrepreneurs get a one-to-one or series of one-to-ones with Ian. We'll be fixing that up shortly, so you can obviously have a your confidential conversations with Ian on more sort of specific question level, which is the theme behind the mentoring series that we've got going. So starting at the bottom of the slide first, we've got 3 at the moment. Grants, which was just today. We have space industry with Mike Curtis Rouse, who's head of manufacturing at the Satellite Applications Catapult. That's same time, 11 o'clock next week on Thursday. We'll be sending out the link to register shortly, hopefully today or early tomorrow. You must register in order to get the invite to the webinar. And Better Business Plans with Don McClaverty, who's on the call today. And that'll be sometime in the week beginning the 22nd of June, so the following week. I'll be sending out a doodle poll to everybody today. Please respond by the close of play on Friday, tomorrow, and we'll be sending out the invitation early next week. So that's the mentoring series. As I say, it comes with a webinar of a similar style we've just given today, and a series of one-to-ones with each and every one of you, and we'll, as I said, be organizing that shortly. And the training series of webinars we've had 4 so far: space industry and agriculture, space industry and government, space industry and finance sector, and manufacturing. So if you're interested in those, I can get you the presentations for those. And the next one at the moment, the last one, although there may be a few more in the near future, is an introduction to orbits, 10 o'clock next Tuesday, 16th of June. So the link is available. Around and about. If you haven't got it, let me know. I think I've sent it out. Primer for orbits, but if you're interested in this sort of, I think it'd be interesting at a general level as well as a space and professional level. Okay, I'm being told my internet connection is unstable. So the last point, so I'm going to come off. No, I'm not going to bother to do that. So last slide then really is just to let you know about the European Space Network that the Astropreneurs Program is putting together. It is, we're part of the program, part of the program is to design and build a pan-European online network for the space industry. So all the Astropreneurs are being asked to respond to a quick survey, which is no longer than 10 minutes or so, to give us some sort of feedback of what you want to see on this network. I'll be sending this out to you shortly. We're very, very keen to get your views, so please, please respond and complete the survey. I know they're a little bit dull, but the more you tell us, the more likely we're going to deliver you something that's useful. Great, so that brings us to an end. I think, thank you very much indeed to everybody for coming. Thanks again, Ian. I thought that was a really excellent and well-delivered presentation. Don, thank you for joining. We'll look forward to seeing yours in a couple of weeks or so. Thanks a lot. We'll see you again, hopefully on Tuesday with the Orbits seminar. If you want to follow this up, at some point there'll be the slides available. Please contact me if you've got any specific questions, and I'll direct them to whoever's most suitable to answer them. Great. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks, Nick. Bye-bye, all.
Bye.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Ian. Everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.